The night air clung to the streets with a damp chill, the kind that seeps into your bones and lingers like an unwelcome guest. Jane Fonda stood beneath the faint, flickering glow of a street lamp, its yellow light spilling long, jagged shadows across the wet pavement. She tugged at the lapels of her blazer, the fabric crisp against her skin. As a soft breeze rustled through the empty street, the upscale boutique behind her had shut its doors hours ago, its darkened windows mirroring the desolate shimmering reflections of a world gone quiet. She glanced at her phone, the screen's cold light illuminating the faint crease of impatience on her brow. Marcus, her assistant, was late, again. The minutes stretched on, each one heavier than the last, and Jane shifted her weight, her heels clicking faintly against the sidewalk as she fought the growing restlessness, gnawing at her. From the shadows came the sound of boots deliberate heavy, slicing through the stillness like a blade. Jane's spine stiffened instinctively, though she kept her face composed, her breath steady. A white police officer emerged into the dim light, his hand resting casually on his belt, fingers brushing the edge of his holster. His eyes, sharp and unyielding, locked onto her with a suspicion that felt like a physical weight. "Hey," he barked, his voice rough, edged with accusation. What are you doing here?" Jane exhaled slowly, forcing calm into her tone despite the flicker of unease curling in her chest. "I'm waiting for someone," she said, meeting his gaze. The officer's expression didn't soften. If anything, it hardened, his lips curling into a faint, skeptical smirk. "Waiting for someone, huh? Out here, at this hour, standing in front of a closed store." His words dripped with doubt, each syllable a challenge. Jane felt a spark of anger flare deep within her, but she tamped it down, her voice steady as she replied, "My car's running late." The officer tilted his head, his smirk growing colder, more cutting. "Standing here in that fancy outfit, something special going on," his tone mocked her, his eyes raking over her tailored blazer as if it were evidence of some unspoken crime. Jane squared her shoulders, her patience thinning, but her resolve unshaken. "I'm just waiting for my car," she said again, each word deliberate, a quiet assertion of her right to simply exist in this space. But the officer stepped closer, his presence looming now, oppressive, like a storm cloud rolling in. "You don't belong here," he said, his voice low and menacing. "Standing alone at night, you are not planning anything shady, are you?" Jane's chest tightened, her breath catching as she fought the urge to snap. "There's nothing like that," she said, forcing the words out evenly. "I'm just waiting for my car." The officer's eyes narrowed, his hand shifting slightly on his belt. "Show me your ID," he demanded, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. Jane's pulse quickened, indignation rising like bile in her throat. "I don't need to show you my ID when I haven't done anything wrong," she said, her voice firm despite the tremor of frustration beneath it. The officer's frown deepened, his jaw tightening. "When I ask, you provide it," he snapped, his words a whip crack in the quiet night. Jane's hands clenched at her sides, her nails digging into her palms as she struggled to keep her composure. "I'm waiting for my car," she said, her voice rising slightly despite her efforts. "That should be reason enough." He shrugged, a dismissive gesture that made her blood simmer. "You don't get to decide that," he said, his tone darkening. "We'll see about that. You're not going anywhere until I say so." The air between them thickened, charged with unspoken threats. Jane's heart thudded against her ribs, her anger warring with the cold pragmatism that told her to stay calm, to not give him an excuse. "There's no reason to make this a bigger issue," she said, her voice tight but controlled. "I'm just waiting for my car." The officer's lips twisted into a sneer. "You seem pretty confident about your rights," he said, his eyes glinting with malice. "But you shouldn't be standing here at this hour." Jane's stomach churned as the weight of his words settled over her words laced with an accusation she knew had nothing to do with the time of night and everything to do with the color of her skin. She could feel the situation teetering on a knife's edge, one wrong move away from disaster. But she wouldn't let him strip her dignity away, not here, not now. The silence stretched, taut and brittle, as they stood facing each other beneath the street lamp's sickly glow. The officer's face was a mask of suspicion, his steely eyes boring into her. his hand still resting on his belt where his handcuffs gleamed faintly. Jane held his gaze, her own eyes steady, a quiet fire burning behind them. "I'll be watching you," he said, his voice a low growl, a promise of trouble yet to come. She didn't reply immediately, letting the weight of his threat hang in the air. Her silence was her shield, her refusal to bend under his scrutiny a quiet act of defiance. The night seemed to hold its breath, the distant hum of the city swallowed by the tension coiling between them. Jane stood rooted to the spot, her body taut, every muscle braced for what might come next. The officer's gaze didn't waver, his posture rigid, his fingers twitching slightly as if itching to reach for those cuffs. Time crawled by, each second an eternity, and Marcus's absence felt like a betrayal, leaving her stranded in this absurd standoff. "I said before," Jane finally spoke, her voice calm but threaded with a growing edge. "I'm just waiting for my assistant. There's no reason for this harassment." The officer took another step forward, his boots scuffing the pavement, his eyes cold as ice. "I don't care what you've said," he replied, his voice thick with contempt. "There's something about you that makes me uneasy." Jane's fists tightened, her knuckles whitening, but she kept her hands still. "What about me makes you uneasy?" she asked, her tone sharp now, cutting through the night. "Is it that I'm standing here in a suit, or is it that you think I don't belong here?" His eyes flashed, a spark of anger igniting in their depths. "Watch your tone," he snarled. "I asked the questions, not you." Jane's heart pounded, a wild rhythm echoing in her ears, but she refused to let it show. "You've been questioning me for 10 minutes, she said, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. "If I were doing something wrong, you'd have found out by now." The officer's lips curled into a sinister smile, his face twisting in the dim light. "Oh, I've found out plenty," he said, his words slow and deliberate. "People like you always think they're smart, that they won't get caught. But I won't let you get away that easily." Lurking around, looking for a chance to break in, Jane's anger erupted, a hot, searing wave she could no longer contain. Lurking, she shot back, her voice rising. "That's what you think. I'm just waiting for my assistant, that's it. You're the one harassing me, looking for any reason to escalate this." The smile vanished from his face, replaced by a glare that could have cut glass. "Harassing you?" He spat. "I'm doing my job, keeping troublemakers like you out of places where they don't belong." Jane took a step forward, her voice as cold as the night air. "Troublemakers like me? What exactly are you implying?" His voice rose, sharp and loud, shattering the quiet. "You know exactly what I mean. You stand there thinking you're smart, but I've seen your type before. A suit doesn't change who you are." Jane's pulse raced, her anger a living thing clawing at her chest. "You don't know anything about me," she said, her words trembling with fury. "I know enough," he sneered, leaning closer. "You're just another person who thinks they can talk their way out of trouble, but not with me." She took a deep breath, fighting to anchor herself. "I haven't done anything wrong," she said, her voice steadying. "You're the one creating trouble." His eyes narrowed, his hand drifting toward the handcuffs. "You're getting real close to crossing the line," he warned, his tone a low rumble. Jane didn't flinch, her voice slicing through the tension. "And what line is that?" "The one where I don't let you harass me just for standing on a public sidewalk." His grip tightened on the cuffs, his face a mask of barely contained rage. "You think you're smart, don't you? Think you can talk back to me? I'm the one in charge here, not you." Jane's blood boiled, a molten heat surging through her veins. But she stood her ground, unyielding. "Power doesn't give you the right to treat people unfairly," she said, her words a quiet thunder. He stepped closer, now mere inches away, his breath hot against the night air. "I don't need a reason," he hissed. "If I feel threatened right now, I don't like the way you're talking to me." Jane's mind raced, the absurdity of it all crashing over her like a wave. "You feel threatened," she said, her voice sharp with disbelief. "I'm standing here, unarmed, just waiting for a ride, and it's you who's threatening me. That's not how things are supposed to work." His jaw clenched, his hand hovering over the cuffs. "I'll decide how things work," he growled. "You're done talking." Jane squared her shoulders, facing him head-on. "I'm not done until you stop treating me like a criminal." Without another word, he yanked the handcuffs free, his movements swift and furious. "That's enough," he barked. "You're under arrest." Jane didn't resist, but her eyes burned with a fierce, unyielding resolve as he seized her arm. The metal cold against her wrists, the truth, she knew, would rise like the sun, unstoppable, undeniable. The night pressed in around them, the streetlights casting their pale glow over the rain-slicked pavement, illuminating the scene in stark, unforgiving clarity. Moments earlier, Jane had stepped out of the boutique, the faint scent of leather and perfume still clinging to her as she adjusted her blazer. The confrontation had erupted almost instantly, the officer's suspicion a dark cloud that swallowed the quiet evening. Now, as he gripped her arm, his fingers digging into her skin, she felt the first stirrings of fear beneath her anger. "You have no right to do this," she said, her voice taut. "I've done nothing wrong." He ignored her, his grip tightening as he pulled her forward with a force that made her stumble. "Don't even think about resisting," he said, his voice a frigid warning. Anger simmered inside her, a slow burn she struggled to contain. "I'm not resisting," she said, her tone firm despite the tremor beneath it. "But you can't arrest me without reason." He responded with brute force, shoving her toward the boutique's window. Her shoulders slammed against the glass, pain exploding through her like a lightning strike. "I told you not to touch me," she snapped, her voice raw as fear pulsed through her veins. The officer leaned in, his breath hot and sour against her cheek. "You're resisting," he growled. "And I don't like that." Her breaths came fast, shallow gasps as she tried to maintain distance, the glass cold against her back. "I'm not resisting," she said, her voice shaking but defiant. "You're the one making this worse." His eyes gleamed with a stubborn, unyielding defiance, his fingers tightening as he shoved her again, harder this time. "Enough," he snarled. "I'm out of patience with you." Before she could respond, his fist swung, a brutal arc that connected with her jaw. The impact roared through her skull, a thunderclap of pain that left her reeling. She stumbled back, her head crashing against the glass, the world tilting and blurring around her. Jane's knees buckled, her hand flying to her face as agony radiated from her jaw, a sharp, pulsing ache that echoed down her neck. She blinked, fighting to steady herself, her vision swimming as the officer loomed over her. His lips curled into a cold, triumphant smile, his voice dripping with mockery. "You just love causing trouble, don't you?" he said, his words a taunt that cut deeper than the blow. In that moment, the weight of it all crashed over her: the injustice, the brutality, the raw, unchecked power he wielded like a weapon. But beneath the pain, beneath the fear, a fire still burned. She wasn't just Jane Fonda, a woman waiting for a ride. She was the mayor, a truth he didn't yet know, a revelation that would soon shatter his arrogance. As she straightened, her hand trembling against her bruised jaw, she met his gaze with a steely resolve. The consequences of his actions would come, swift and unrelenting, a lesson in justice that would echo far beyond this rain-soaked street. For every abuse of power, there is a reckoning, and his was approaching, as inevitable as the dawn. The night was frigid, the kind that seeped into your bones and left a lingering chill no coat could shake off. Jane stood beneath the faint glow of a street lamp, her breath fogging in the air, her mind lost in thought as she waited in the upscale part of town she called home. She hadn't expected trouble, not here, not tonight, but trouble came anyway, cloaked in a uniform meant to promise safety. The officer's voice sliced through the quiet, low and dripping with a twisted triumph, as if he'd already won some unspoken battle. "You're gonna learn your lesson," he growled, his hands seizing her with a force that made her stomach lurch. Before she could react, he slammed her face first into the patrol car's window, the cold glass biting into her cheek like a slap from winter itself. Pain flared through her, sharp and immediate, as he pressed her down harder, his weight a deliberate reminder of his control. Jane's chest heaved against the unyielding surface, her breath shallow and ragged, her arm twisted painfully behind her back, a dull ache blooming into something fiercer with every second. She fought to speak, her voice fractured by the strain, each word a struggle against the agony. "You have no right to do this," she managed, her defiance flickering like a candle in a storm. The officer leaned in close, his breath hot against her ear, his tone venomous. "Just try me." he hissed, his eyes glinting with a menace that sent a shiver down her spine. The metallic click of handcuffs punctuated his threat, and soon the cold steel clamped around her wrists, digging into her skin with a cruel bite. She winced, her body tensing as the cuffs tightened, but he didn't relent. Instead, he shoved her toward the patrol car, his movements rough and unrelenting. Her cheek pressed harder against the window, the icy surface numbing her face as waves of shock and pain crashed through her mind. She tried to shift, to ease the pressure, but his grip was iron, pinning her in place. Her breath mingled with the night air, short bursts of mist that betrayed her rising panic. "Get down," he barked, yanking her away from the window with a sudden jerk. Her body stumbled, unprepared, and her knee collided with the asphalt in a jolt of fresh torment. She gasped, the sound escaping her lips before she could stop it. The punch he'd landed earlier still throbbed in her cheek, leaving it numb and tingling, while her head spun in a dizzying whirl. Everything had unraveled so fast for her to piece together how she'd ended up here. Sprawled on the ground, handcuffed and helpless, Jane's thoughts raced, a chaotic swirl of disbelief and outrage. She knew she was innocent, hadn't done a thing to warrant this brutality. Yet here she was, pinned to the pavement by someone sworn to uphold the law, someone who saw her as nothing more than a target for his anger. The officer towered over her, his chest heaving with exertion and fury, his face twisted into a sneer. "Next time, you'll think twice before resisting arrest," he spat, his voice thick with contempt. Jane lifted her head, her vision swimming, her body screaming in protest. But her spirit refused to break. "You'll regret this," she said, her words steady despite the ache radiating through her. He smirked, his eyes narrowing with disdain. "No, I don't think so. You'll regret it more." The wind howled through the empty street, a bitter gust that matched the chill in his tone, but Jane felt something shift inside her. Beneath the pain, beneath the rising tide of anger, a quiet resolve took root. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The handcuffs bit deeper as he dragged her toward the patrol car, her muscles protesting with every step. But even as her body ached, that strange calm grew stronger, steadying her. She knew something he didn't, a secret that hummed in her chest like a hidden ace. His smug expression faltered not an inch as he wrenched open the back door with a rough flourish. "Get in the car," he ordered, his voice sharp with impatience. "I warned you not to resist." But Jane didn't hurry. She drew a slow, deliberate breath, straightening her spine despite the pain, and met his gaze with a faint, knowing smirk. "Before you throw me in," she said, her tone cool and measured, "why don't you check my ID first?" The officer froze, his hands still gripping the door, his brows knitting together in a flash of confusion. "What the hell are you talking about?" he demanded, suspicion creeping into his voice. Jane's smile held firm, now tinged with a quiet confidence that unsettled him. "You heard me. Check my ID. It's in my coat pocket." He hesitated, his eyes narrowing as if weighing whether this was some trick, some desperate ploy. "You had your chance to show ID. Now you want to cooperate." He scoffed, but there was a crack in his bravado. Jane's gaze didn't waver, her voice growing firmer, a steel edge beneath the calm. "Check it. You'll want to know who you just handcuffed before this gets worse for you." For a moment, his confidence flickered, a shadow of doubt crossing his face. But he couldn't resist the challenge. "All right," he muttered, his tone grudging. "Let's see what you're trying to pull." He reached into her pocket, his movements brusque, and fished out her wallet, flipping it open with an impatient grunt. He tugged out the card and squinted at it under the dim streetlight. Then, in an instant, his world shifted. His face drained of color, the smugness evaporating like mist in the sun, replaced by a stark, unmistakable panic. His eyes darted from the ID to Jane's face, then back again, as if hoping the text would rewrite itself. It didn't. "You're," he stammered, his voice catching in his throat. "That's right," Jane replied, her tone still even but now laced with a cold, cutting edge. "I'm the mayor of this city." The officer stared at the ID, his hands trembling faintly, the weight of his mistake crashing down like a tidal wave. He'd just assaulted and handcuffed the most powerful woman in town. His pride crumpled, and he fumbled with the handcuffs, his fingers clumsy in their haste. as if unlocking them could somehow undo the past 10 minutes. The aggression that had fueled him moments ago was gone, replaced by a raw, visceral fear. "Ma'am, you didn't know," he stuttered, his voice small and shaky. "I didn't realize." Jane's gaze sharpened, pinning him where he stood. "You didn't realize because you let your prejudice guide you," she said, her words ringing with authority. "You assumed that because I'm a black woman standing here, I must be a threat, someone dangerous. Do you understand what your actions have set in motion?" His face flushed red with shame, his hands trembling as he finally freed her wrists. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he mumbled, his voice barely audible. "I didn't mean." Jane cut him off, her tone slicing through his excuse like a knife. "You didn't mean to punch me. You didn't mean to slam me into a car and cuff me like a criminal. No, you acted on instincts you've honed for years, instincts that told you I didn't belong, that I was less than you. That's what you did." He flinched, searching for words, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "Ma'am, I thought you were a threat." She stepped closer, her presence towering despite her aching body, and he instinctively shrank back. "You thought," she said, her voice low and unyielding. "That's the problem. You didn't think. You saw me, you judged me, and now you're facing the consequences." He stood there, frozen, his wide eyes brimming with dread. "I'm sorry," he whispered, the words hollow. "I didn't mean for it to go this far." Jane tilted her head, her expression hardening. "That's exactly what happens when you let bias rule you. You're supposed to protect and serve, not attack those you decide are different. And now, here we are." His shoulders slumped, his breath uneven as he tried to steady himself. But the panic in his eyes betrayed him. "I made a mistake," he said weakly. Jane's laugh was sharp, humorless. "A mistake? Do you think an apology fixes this? Do you think calling it a mistake makes me forget what you did?" He dropped his gaze, unable to meet the fire in her eyes, the realization sinking in that there was no escape from this reckoning. Jane watched him squirm for a long moment, then stepped back, her voice dropping to a steely calm. "Give me your badge number." Now, his hands shook as he fumbled to comply, reciting the digits in a trembling rush. She pulled out her phone, her fingers steady as she typed, her eyes never leaving his face. When she finished, she gave him one final look, a look that promised this wasn't the end. "You'll be hearing from me," she said, her words a vow etched in stone. Then she turned and walked away, leaving him rooted to the spot, drowning in a sea of regret and fear. The streetlights cast long, wavering shadows as Jane moved down the road, her steps deliberate despite the ache in her bones. Her mind churned, heavy with the weight of what had happened. This wasn't just one bad night, it was a symptom of something rotten, a sickness of racism and unchecked power festering in the system. She could still feel the officer's hands on her, the sting of his assumptions, but beneath it all burned a fierce determination. Change was coming, and she'd be the one to drag it into the light, no matter the cost. By the time she reached home, the adrenaline had faded, leaving exhaustion in its wake. She sank into a chair, her body protesting every movement, and pulled out her phone. Her voice was low and urgent as she dialed Marcus, her closest friend and aide at City Hall. "Marcus, get to my office now," she said, the words clipped with purpose. "I need to talk to you about something serious." On the other end, Marcus's voice crackled with surprise, but he didn't hesitate. "Jane, what's going on?" he asked, concern threading through his tone. "Just come," she replied, hanging up before he could press further. She knew he'd understand the gravity once he saw her face. Less than 30 minutes later, Marcus burst through the door, his coat still dusted with the night's chill. He found Jane by the window, staring out at the city's flickering lights, her silhouette tense and unyielding. "What happened?" he asked, crossing the room in quick strides. "You're scaring me." She turned, her eyes blazing with a mix of fury and resolve. "Last night, I was attacked by a police officer," she said, her voice steady but laced with a raw edge. "He assumed I didn't belong in that neighborhood, and before I could say a word, he assaulted me, cuffed me, threw me down like I was nothing." Marcus's jaw dropped, his broad face tightening with shock. "Attacked you? Why hasn't this blown up already?" he demanded, his hands clenching at his sides. Jane nodded, her lips pressing into a thin line. Because he didn't know who I was until he checked my ID. When he saw I was the mayor, his whole world fell apart. Fear took over, but I don't care about his regret. I care about what comes next. Marcus stepped closer, his brown eyes searching hers, trying to gauge the depth of her anger. So what's the plan? He asked, his voice softening but firm with readiness. What do you need from me? Jane's gaze hardened, a storm brewing behind her calm exterior. First, I'm filing a formal complaint against him. He'll face the consequence, he'll make sure of it. Then I want a meeting with the police chief. This isn't just about one officer. It's about a system that lets this happen. We're going to rip it open and fix it, Marcus, no matter how deep the rot goes. He nodded, a slow, determined dip of his head, his loyalty unshakable. I'm with you, he said simply. Let's make them answer for it. As Marcus turned to leave, Jane's thoughts drifted back to the officer's panicked eyes, his trembling hands. He'd abused his power, let prejudice twist justice into something ugly, and now the consequences would come crashing down. But this was bigger than him. It was a lesson in accountability, a warning that power unchecked would always meet its reckoning. And Jane Fonda, mayor and survivor, would see it through to the end. The air in the room felt thick with unspoken tension as Marcus stood beside Jane, his dark eyes flickering with a mix of concern and resolve. This wasn't just about her anymore, and they both knew it. The sting of her bruised jaw from the night before pulsed faintly beneath her skin, a cruel reminder of the violence she'd endured. But it was nothing compared to the fire igniting deep within her chest. She clenched her fists so tightly her knuckles whitened, her nails digging into her palms as she fought to keep her voice steady. This isn't just a personal matter, Marcus, she said, her words trembling with a quiet fury she could no longer suppress. It's bigger than me. It's a systemic issue, a rot that's been festering in the police force for far too long. We have to do something. We have to change this. Marcus tilted his head, his broad shoulders shifting as he absorbed the weight of her words. He wasn't just hearing her, he was feeling the depth of her pain, the urgency of her plea. This wasn't merely about shielding Jane from the humiliation and injustice she'd faced. It was a chance to confront a pervasive sickness, a culture of discrimination and unchecked power that had gone unchallenged for years. He exhaled slowly, his brow furrowing as he nodded. I get it, Jane. I'm with you on this. I'll take care of filing the complaint through the proper channels, and I'll set up a meeting with Chief Donald by tomorrow morning. We'll push this forward. His voice was calm but firm, laced with a loyalty that steadied her racing heart. Then he paused, his gaze softening as he studied her face. But are you sure you want to take it this far? You know how they'll react. The pressure from the Policite's going to be relentless. Jane's eyes narrowed, her resolve hardening like steel under fire. She could still feel the echoes of that officer's fist against her jaw, the venom in his voice as he'd sneered at her on that dimly lit sidewalk, treating her like she was less than human. Her breath hitched as a wave of memories crashed over her, countless moments of being dismissed, belittled, and overlooked simply because of who she was. This isn't the first time I've been targeted, Marcus, she said, her voice low and sharp, cutting through the silence between them. I've swallowed it before, let it slide because I thought I had to, but not this time. This time, it's too personal, not just for me, but for everyone else out there like me. People who don't have a voice, who can't fight back. If we don't stand up now, this ugliness will just keep spreading, poisoning everything it touches. Her words hung heavy in the air, and Marcus felt them settle into his bones. He stepped closer, his presence a quiet pillar of strength, and placed a warm, steady hand on her shoulder. His touch grounded her, pulling her back from the edge of her rage. I hear you, Jane, he said, his voice rich with conviction, and I'm not going anywhere. We'll face whatever they throw at you together. You won't have to carry this alone. His eyes locked with hers, and in that moment, she saw not just a friend, but a partner willing to wade into the storm by her side. Relief softened the edges of her anger, and she managed a faint, grateful smile. Thank you, Marcus. We're going to do this right. No shortcuts, no backing down. The next morning, as Jane stepped through the towering glass doors of City Hall, a surge of newfound strength coursed through her veins. The early sunlight spilled across the polished marble floors, casting golden streaks that danced around her feet. but the ache in her body still whispered of the brutality she'd endured. Each step echoed with purpose, her heels clicking against the stone as she moved toward her office. Inside, Marcus was already waiting, his sleeves rolled up, papers spread across her desk like a battle map. He looked up as she entered, his face brightening with a quiet confidence. "Everything's set," he said, his tone brisk and efficient. "The complaint's been filed with the police department, and the meeting with Chief Donald is locked in for this afternoon. We're ready." Jane nodded, drawing a deep breath that steadied her nerves. She could feel the weight of what lay ahead, but it no longer crushed her, it fueled her. "It's time." "Marcus," she said, her voice resolute, "this isn't just about fixing one wrong. We're going to dismantle the whole damn system." Their eyes met, a silent pact passing between them. They weren't just fighting for her dignity anymore. They were waging a war against a machine that had grown arrogant and corrupt, a machine that thrived on silence and submission. As she stepped out of the office, the burden on her shoulders morphed into something else, a fierce, unyielding power she hadn't known she possessed. The road ahead would be treacherous, but with Marcus at her side, she felt ready to face it. Later that morning, Jane strode into the police headquarters with a purpose that radiated from her every movement. Her jaw throbbed faintly, a dull reminder of the punch that had landed there the night before. But she held her head high, her posture unbowed. The early sunlight filtered through the tall windows, painting long, jagged shadows across the cold, tiled floor, and the faint hum of fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Marcus walked just behind her, his steady presence a shield against the uncertainty swirling in her gut. They approached the reception desk, where a harried officer shuffled through a stack of papers, his uniform slightly wrinkled from a long shift. He glanced up, and recognition flashed in his eyes as they landed on Jane's bruised face. His pen froze mid-scribble. "I need to see Chief Donald," Jane said, her voice calm but edged with an authority that left no room for debate. The officer's gaze darted to the purple mark blooming along her jaw, and he hesitated, his fingers twitching nervously. Yes, ma'am," he stammered, fumbling for the phone. "I'll let him know right away." He dialed quickly, his voice hushed as he relayed the message. Moments later, the heavy door at the end of the hall creaked open, and Chief Donald emerged, his tall frame filling the space with an imposing air. In his 50s, with streaks of silver threading through his dark hair, he carried himself with the weight of years spent commanding respect. But when his eyes fell on Jane's bruise, his brow creased, a flicker of unease tightening his features. "Miss Fonda," Donald said, extending a hand in a gesture of civility. His voice was smooth, practiced, but Jane didn't move to take it. She stood rooted to the spot, her gaze piercing through his facade. "Please, come into my office. We need to talk about what happened last night." Without waiting for her response, he turned and led the way down a long, sterile hallway, his polished shoes thudding against the tiles with a rhythm that echoed his authority. Marcus followed close behind Jane, his silence a steady reassurance as they stepped into Donald's office. The door clicked shut, sealing them in a space that felt suffocating, the air thick with tension. Donald gestured to the chairs across from his wide oak desk, but Jane remained standing, her eyes locked on him like a predator sizing up its prey. "I heard there was an incident last night," Donald began, settling into his chair. His tone was measured, almost detached, as if he were discussing a minor inconvenience. Jane's lips curled into a bitter scoff, the sound sharp enough to slice through his calm. "An incident," she repeated, her voice icy. "One of your officers assaulted me, harassed me, all because I was standing on a sidewalk." "You call that an incident?" Donald's expression faltered, a shadow of confusion crossing his face. He leaned forward slightly, clasping his hands on the desk. "I understand you're upset, Miss Fonda. We'll look into this thoroughly, follow protocol." Before he could finish, the door swung open, and Officer Christian Pesic stepped inside. The room seemed to shrink as his presence filled it. His face was pale, his eyes wide with a panic he couldn't hide. The cocky sneer he'd worn the night before was gone, replaced by a trembling uncertainty as he glanced at Jane, then quickly averted his gaze. He knew why he was here, and the weight of it pressed down on him like a physical force. Donald's eyes narrowed as he turned to the young officer. "Officer Pesic," he said, his voice dropping to a stern growl. "Sit down. We need to get to the bottom of this." Christian obeyed, his movements stiff and mechanical as he sank into the chair across from Jane. His hands fidgeted in his lap, his fingers twisting together as if trying to wring out his growing dread. The arrogance that had fueled his actions the night before had evaporated, leaving behind a shell of a man who could barely meet the eyes of those he'd wronged. Jane stepped forward, her shadow falling across him as she spoke. "What were you thinking last night, Officer Pesek?" Her voice was steady, but carried a quiet, searing intensity that made the air crackle. "When you ignored every word I said. When you let your temper spiral out of control, what was going through your head?" Christian shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting between Jane and Donald like a trapped animal. "To didn't know who you were," he stammered, his voice thin and shaky. "I thought." Jane cut him off, her tone slicing through his excuse like a blade. "You thought what?" she demanded, leaning closer. "That you could treat me like trash because I didn't look like I belonged there? That your badge gave you the right to judge me, to hurt me? You didn't care about the truth. When I tried to explain, you answered with your fist." Her words landed like blows, each one stripping away the flimsy defenses he'd built. Donald's face hardened as he turned to Christian, his jaw tightening. "Officer Pesek, this is indefensible. Why didn't you de-escalate? Why did you let it get this far?" Christian swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing as sweat beaded on his forehead. "To made a mistake," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I thought she was." Jane's patience snapped. "You didn't think," she said, her voice rising with controlled fury. "You acted on your prejudice. You let your bias decide who I was, and instead of listening, you abused your power. That's not a mistake, it's a choice." Christian's head dropped, his shoulders slumping as shame swallowed him whole. "I'm sorry," he muttered, the words dissolving into the heavy silence. But Jane wasn't finished. She straightened, her gaze unyielding. "Your apology doesn't erase what you did," she said, her voice cutting through the room. "This isn't just about me. You broke the trust you're supposed to uphold. What you did was an attack on everyone who's ever been dismissed, harassed, or beaten down by someone wearing that uniform. Justice isn't served with empty words, it demands accountability." Donald nodded slowly, his expression grave as he addressed Christian. "Officer Pesek, your actions have consequences. You're suspended, effective immediately, pending a full investigation. This isn't negotiable." Christian's face crumpled, the reality of his fall crashing over him. He opened his mouth to protest, but Donald's icy glare silenced him. His eyes flicked to Jane, brimming with regret. But the damage was done. There was no undoing the choices that had led him here. Jane turned to Chief Donald, her voice steady but laced with a quiet fire. "This isn't just about one officer, Chief. There's a culture in your department that breeds this kind of behavior, a culture that turns a blind eye to prejudice, that lets power run wild. It has to stop. Now." Donald's lips pressed into a thin line, a flicker of resistance crossing his face before he nodded. "You're right, Miss Fonda. There are deeper issues here. I'll take steps to review our practices, address the rot." "Steps aren't enough," Jane interrupted, crossing her arms. "This can't be buried in paperwork or hushed up behind closed doors. I want a transparent investigation, public, thorough, undeniable. The people deserve to know their police force isn't above the law." Donald hesitated, the weight of her demand pressing against his authority, but he relented with a curt nod. "We'll make it happen." Jane leaned closer to his desk, her voice dropping to a fierce whisper. "This isn't just an incident, Chief, it's a reckoning. If this department doesn't own up to its failures, I'll make sure the whole city sees the truth. Power without justice is tyranny, and I won't let it stand." The room pulsed with the intensity of her words. After a long, taut silence, Donald spoke, his voice softer but resolute. "I understand." Jane turned to Christian one last time, her eyes boring into him. "You thought your badge made you untouchable," she said, her tone unwavering. "But today, you've learned that power doesn't shield you from consequences. It's a lesson this whole system needs to take to heart." Christian stayed silent, his head bowed, the weight of his regret a chain he couldn't escape. Jane stepped back, her mission clear. This was only the beginning. Justice wasn't just a word, it was a force, and she'd wield it until the world bent toward it. The moment Jane Fonda stepped out of the suffocating confines of the police headquarters, the crisp morning breeze brushed against her face, a stark contrast to the heavy tension that had gripped her inside. Fear had etched itself into every line of the officer's expression back there, a silent confession that things had spiraled far beyond the reach of a simple apology. Her jaw still ached, a throbbing reminder of the assault she'd endured, but her mind was already racing ahead, plotting the next move in a battle she knew was only beginning. Beside her, Marcus matched her stride, his presence steady and reassuring. Though his furrowed brow betrayed the weight of the moment, the air outside felt lighter, yes, but it carried an electric charge of promise that the fight for justice and reform was about to ignite something massive. Jane's heart pounded with a mix of exhaustion and determination. This wasn't over, not by a long shot, and she was ready to face whatever storms lay ahead. As they crossed the bustling street towards City Hall, the city waking up around them with honking cars and the chatter of pedestrians, Marcus broke the silence, his voice cutting through the morning hum. "Jane, we've got to play this smart," he said, his tone low but urgent, his dark eyes scanning her face for a reaction. "The police department isn't going to let this slide quietly. They'll dodge, deflect, and downplay everything that happened to you." Jane nodded, her lips pressed into a tight line, her mind churning. She could already picture the dismissive press releases, the vague promises of internal reviews designed to bury the truth under layers of red tape. "I know," she replied, her voice steady despite the dull pain pulsing through her face. "But I'm not letting them sweep this under the rug with some bureaucratic nonsense. This has to go public. People need to see it's not just about one rogue cop. It's the whole damn system rotting from the inside." Her words carried a fire that surprised even her, a resolve forged in the raw heat of betrayal and injustice. When they reached the steps of City Hall, its imposing stone facade looming above them like a silent judge, Jane's phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, squinting at the screen in the bright sunlight. A text from a local reporter, hungry for a comment on the incident that was already rippling through the city's gossip channels. The news was spreading like wildfire, and Jane felt a surge of adrenaline. She turned to Marcus, her expression hardening with purpose. "We need to take control of this story before they do," she said, her voice sharp with intent. "Set up a press conference for this afternoon. I'm not letting them spin this their way." Marcus gave a quick nod, his fingers already tapping at his phone to make it happen. "It's going to get messy, Jane," he warned, his tone cautious but supportive. "But if we frame it right, we can turn the spotlight on the bigger issue." Jane's gaze turned steely, her green eyes glinting with defiance. "Good. We need the public behind us. This isn't just my fight, it's for every single person who's been crushed by a system that shields the powerful and punishes the rest." That afternoon, the scene outside City Hall buzzed with restless energy as a crowd of reporters gathered, their cameras flashing and microphones poised like weapons. The sun hung high, casting sharp shadows across the concrete steps where Jane and Marcus stood side by side. Marcus, tall and composed in his crisp suit, exuded a quiet strength, but his clenched jaw hinted at the storm brewing beneath his calm exterior. Jane stepped up to the podium, her face a mask of serenity masking the fury simmering within. She took a deep breath, the cool air filling her lungs, and began to speak, her voice ringing out clear and unshaken. "Last night, I was attacked and harassed by an officer of this city's police force," she said, her words slicing through the murmur of the crowd. "I was standing on a public sidewalk, minding my own business, when he decided my mere existentiam apparence was a crime worth punishing." The reporters leaned in, hanging on her every syllable. As a ripple of shock passed through them, Jane's voice grew bolder, fueled by the memory of that officer's sneer and the weight of his baton. "This isn't just about me," she continued, pausing to let her words settle into the minds of her listeners. "It's about a deep-seated bias rotting our police force from within. That officer didn't see me as a person with rights, with dignity, saw me as a target. And I'm here to demand a full, public investigation and real, lasting reforms." The crowd erupted into a frenzy of shouted questions, but Jane raised a hand, silencing them with the authority of someone who'd been pushed too far. "This is bigger than one incident," she declared, her voice rising with passion. This is the fight of every citizen in this city. We deserve a police force that protects us all, not one that abuses its power and hides behind excuses." As she stepped back from the podium, the reporters scrambled to capture the moment, their voices overlapping in a chaotic symphony. Marcus caught her eye and gave a small, approving nod, though his expression remained grave. "You were incredible," he said later, back in the quiet of her office. The hum of the city muffled beyond the walls, but Jane's face stayed somber, her thoughts already racing ahead. "This is just the start, Marcus. If we don't keep pushing, this will keep happening to people who can't fight back." In the days that followed, Jane's story exploded across the city like a thunderclap, reverberating through newsrooms and living rooms alike. The media latched onto it, some outlets amplifying her call for reform while others twisted it into sensational headlines. Protests sprang up like wildfires, citizens spilling into the streets with signs and chants, demanding transparency and accountability. The city became a pressure cooker, the national spotlight turning it into a battleground for debates about police brutality and systemic racism. Public support swelled, a tidal wave of voices echoing Jane's own. But the police union didn't sit idly by. Behind closed doors, they rallied their defenses, issuing statements that painted the officer as a dutiful servant of protocol and accused Jane of exploiting her ordeal for political clout. One morning, Marcus burst into her office, his usual calm replaced by a rare edge of anxiety. "Jane, the union's hitting back hard," he said, pacing the worn carpet. "They're claiming you're blowing this out of proportion, that the officer was just doing his job." Jane's jaw tightened, her fingers drumming on the desk. "I'm not against the police, Marcusim against the abuse of power. If they can't tell the difference, that's exactly why we're in this mess." He nodded, though his worry lingered. "They'll get nasty, Jane. We need to brace ourselves." Her resolve didn't waver. "Let them try. I'm not backing down." Weeks rolled by, and the city pulsed with tension. Debates raged in town halls and on street corners, while protests grew louder, their chants echoing off skyscrapers and tenements alike. Jane stood firm, her voice a beacon for those rallying behind her, her every word stoking the flames of a movement. Then came the day of the public hearing, moment that felt like the entire city held its breath. The council chamber was a cavernous space, its high ceilings and polished wood amplifying every sound. Jane stepped inside, her heels clicking against the floor, and felt the weight of countless ICE Council members with their stern faces, reporters scribbling furiously, and community leaders like Mrs. Carter, a weary grandmother who'd lost a son to police violence, her presence a quiet pillar of strength. The air crackled with anticipation as Jane took her seat at the front, her hands steady despite the storm raging in her chest. When her turn came, she rose, her posture straight as an arrow, and faced the council. "Members of the council," she began, her voice calm but laced with an unshakable fire. "Today, I'm not just speaking as your mayor. I'm speaking as someone who's felt the sting of the systemic failures in our police force firsthand. What happened to me could happen to anyone. It has happened to so many who didn't have a voice to fight back." She paused, letting the silence amplify her words. "We need reforms that demand accountability, that shine a light through the shadows of corruption, that deliver justice, and not just for me, but for every soul in this city. We can't keep letting those meant to protect us wield their power like a weapon against us." Her voice swelled, each sentence a hammer striking stone. "The people deserve better. We deserve a police force that serves everyone, not just the privileged few." As she finished, the room hung in a stunned hush, her words a thunderbolt that left no one untouched. Then applause erupted, a roar of approval that shook the walls. The public's support a palpable force. The hearing marked a turning point, but Jane knew the war was far from won. Her speech echoed beyond the chamber, sparking conversations in every corner of the city, from the gleaming penthouses of the elite to the crumbling stoops of forgotten neighborhoods. Protests intensified, their demands for reform growing sharper, more urgent. Yet the police union dug in deeper, their counterattacks slick and calculated. One afternoon, Marcus stormed into her office, his face taut with urgency. "Jane, the union's planning a big push tomorrow, a press conference, claiming your reforms will tank public safety. They're going all out to bury you." Jane leaned back in her chair, unfazed. "They're not protecting Safety, they're protecting their own. We're not stopping." Marcus hesitated, his loyalty warring with his nerves. "They've got power." "Jane, they'll fight dirty." She met his gaze, her eyes blazing. "So will Webbit, we've got the truth. The people see it, and they're done waiting." The next day, the union took their stand. Their press conference a polished assault on Jane's vision. Officers in crisp uniforms spoke of duty and danger, warning that her reforms would handcuff their ability to keep the city safe. The media split down the middle. Some parroted the union's line, preaching law and order, while others championed Jane's crusade. That night, she and Marcus huddled with their team in a cramped office, the air thick with coffee and determination. "They're framing it as us against them," Marcus said, rubbing his temples, trying to scare people into picking sides. Jane's voice cut through the fatigue. "Then we show them it's not about tearing down the police, it's about rooting out the rot. We'll double down on the community." A young advisor, Lisa, piped up, her eyes bright with ideas. "Let's lean into the neighborhood, show the support from folks like Mrs. Carter. People trust their own." Jane nodded, a spark of hope flaring. "Good. Let's hold meetings, hear their stories. This fight belongs to them as much as me." In the weeks that followed, Jane threw herself into the fray, crisscrossing the city to meet with residents in church basements, school gyms, and cracked parking lots. Each story she heard off fear, loss, and fragile hope poured fuel on her fire. Mrs. Carter stood beside her at one meeting, her voice trembling but fierce as she recounted her son's death, her gnarled hands clutching a faded photo. "I'm here because Jane's fighting for what I couldn't," she said, and the crowd murmured in solidarity. Meanwhile, the union escalated their war, flooding TV screens with ads of dark streets and rising crime, their influence pressing on the council like a vice. But Jane's movement grew stronger, a chorus of voices drowning out the fear-mongering. She knew the lesson at the heart of it all. Justice wasn't a gift bestowed by the powerful, it was a flame tended by the relentless, a reckoning for those who'd abused their authority. As the city teetered on the edge of change, Jane Fonda stood ready, her spirit unbowed, her eyes fixed on the long road ahead. The air hung heavy with anticipation as the city council prepared to vote on Jane's reform package, a culmination of months of tireless effort and unyielding resolve. Outside City Hall, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows over a swelling crowd of citizens, their faces etched with determination and hope. Handmade signs bobbed above their heads, bold letters proclaiming justice for all and accountability now, swaying like banners of a quiet revolution. The murmur of their voices rose and fell, a restless tide pressing against the stone steps, while the distant hum of traffic underscored the electric tension gripping the city. Inside the council chamber, Jane sat beside Marcus, her closest confidant and ally, her pulse hammering in her chest like a drumbeat she couldn't silence. She had poured everything into this fight, every sleepless night, every heated argument, every fleeting moment of doubt swallowed by her steadfast belief in what was right. Her hands gripped the arms of her chair, knuckles whitening as she watched the council members, their faces a gallery of guarded expressions. Some met her gaze with subtle nods of encouragement, others avoided her entirely, their eyes darting to the polished table before them as if it held the answers they feared to voice. The police union's influence loomed like a shadow across the room, its pressure a silent but suffocating force that had swayed more than one vote in its favor. Jane knew the odds were razor thin, and the uncertainty gnawed at her, a quiet storm raging beneath her composed exterior. Marcus shifted beside her, his broad shoulders tense, his dark eyes scanning the room with a mix of wariness and resolve. He'd been with her from the start, a steady presence amid the chaos, his faith in her unshaken even when hers faltered. "We've done all we can," he'd whispered earlier, his voice low and reassuring. But now his silence spoke louder than words. He understood the stakes as well as she did. This wasn't just about policy. It was about dismantling a system that had grown corrupt under the weight of unchecked power, a system that had silenced too many for too long. The clock on the wall ticked relentlessly, each second stretching into eternity as the council president called for the vote. The chamber fell silent, the air thick with unspoken hopes and fears. One by one, the council members spoke their decisions, their voices steady, but betraying flickers of emotion, some firm with conviction, others hesitant, as if wrestling with the consequences of their choice. Jane's breath caught as the tally climbed, the numbers teetering on a knife's edge. Her mind raced, replaying every meeting, every plea, every compromise she'd fought for. She thought of the community leaders who'd stood by her, their voices trembling with passion as they recounted years of injustice. She thought of the former officers who'd risked their reputations to support her, their quiet courage a testament to the change she sought. And she thought of the countless citizens outside, their chants filtering through the walls, a chorus of defiance against a status quo that had failed them. The final vote came a soft, deliberate yes from Councilwoman Elena Torres, a woman Jane had spent hours persuading over coffee in a dimly lit diner. Elena's eyes met Jane's for a fleeting moment, a spark of solidarity passing between them before she looked away. The room held its breath as the council president cleared his throat, his voice cutting through the stillness. By a margin of 1 vote, the reform package passes. A wave of relief crashed over Jane, her shoulders sagging as the tension drained from her body. But the victory was bittersweet, tempered by the weight of what lay ahead. She turned to Marcus, his face breaking into a rare, wide grin, but her own smile was cautious, her mind already turning to the battle still to come. Outside, the crowd erupted, a roar of triumph shaking the ground beneath their feet. Jane and Marcus stepped onto the steps of City Hall, the cool evening air brushing against their skin as they faced the sea of supporters. The sky had deepened to a bruised purple, streetlights flickering to life, casting a golden glow over the upturned faces below. Jane's heart swelled as she looked out at the young activists with fire in their eyes, weary parents clutching their children's hands, elderly men and women who'd seen decades of promises broken, but still dared to hope. These were the people who'd carried her this far, their faith in her a lifeline through the darkest days. She stepped to the edge of the stairs, the makeshift podium creaking under her weight, and raised a hand to quiet the cheers. Her voice, when it came, was steady but laced with a raw, unshakable emotion that rippled through the crowd. "Today, we've taken a vital step toward justice and accountability," she began, her words ringing out clear and strong. "This victory isn't mine, it's yours. It belongs to every one of you who stood up, who refused to stay silent, who demanded that our city be a place where power serves the people, not itself." The crowd roared again, a unified cry that sent shivers down her spine, but she pressed on, her tone growing fiercer. "But let me be clear, this is not the end. It's the beginning. The road ahead is long, and there will be resistance. The police force must earn back the trust it's broken, and we will hold them to it every day. Every step until we have a system that protects every single one of us, no matter who we are." As the cheers swelled once more, Jane felt a fire ignite within her, a purpose that burned brighter than ever. She thought of the lesson etched into this moment. Justice wasn't a gift bestowed from above, it was a flame kindled by the hands of those brave enough to fight for it. And when power was abused, when those meant to protect instead preyed on the vulnerable, the consequences rippled far beyond the act itself, eroding trust, fracturing communities, and leaving scars that took generations to heal. This victory was proof that change was possible, but it was also a warning complicity could unravel it all. Later that evening, in the quiet of her cluttered office, Jane sank into her chair, exhaustion seeping into her bones. Marcus sat across from her, his tie loosened, a tired but genuine smile tugging at his lips. "We did it," he said, his voice warm with pride. Jane nodded, her fingers tracing the edge of a worn notebook filled with her plans and dreams for the city. "We did," she agreed, "but the real work starts now. Passing the reforms was the easy part, making them stick, that's the challenge." Marcus leaned back, his gaze steady and admiring. "You've started something huge, Jane. People are watching now. You've given them hope, real hope." Her lips curved into a faint smile, though her thoughts were already racing ahead. "Hope's a powerful thing," she said softly, her voice tinged with both wonder and resolve. "But it's up to us to turn it into something concrete, something lasting." She knew the police union wouldn't relent, that every inch of progress would be a fight. But as she glanced out the window at the city lights twinkling against the night, she felt a quiet certainty settle over her. This wasn't just her battle, it was theirs, all of theirs and together. They'd forge a future where justice wasn't a privilege, but a right. The days that followed buzzed with energy, the city alive with the aftershocks of the vote. Community leaders like Reverend Amos Carter, a weary man with a voice that could shake walls, rallied their congregations, his sermons weaving tales of resilience with calls to action. Young activists like Leila Nguyen, barely 20 but fierce as a storm, organized marches, her sharp eyes glinting with defiance as she handed out flyers in the rain. Even former officers like Tom Grayson, grizzled and soft-spoken, stepped forward, his hands trembling as he recounted decades of watching good cops crushed under corrupt leadership. Their voices wove into a tapestry of support that bolstered Jane's resolve, each one a reminder of why she'd fought so hard. But the police union's resistance didn't waver. One morning, Marcus burst into Jane's office, his brow furrowed as he slapped a stack of papers onto her desk. "There it is already," he said, frustration lacing his words. "The document's a memo from the police department outlining subtle maneuvers to delay the reforms. Budget reallocations, vague compliance reports, loopholes wide enough to drive a truck through." Jane's jaw tightened as she skimmed the pages, her mind racing. "I expected this," she said, her tone resolute. "They won't go quietly. But neither will we." She looked up, her eyes blazing with determination. "We'll take it public. Call a press conference. The people need to know what's happening, and they need to fight with us." The press conference unfolded under a gray sky, the wind tugging at Jane's coat as she stood at the podium, flanked by Reverend Carter, Leila, and a handful of others who'd become her unshakable allies. Cameras flashed, reporters jostled for position, and the crowd stretched out before her, a patchwork of faces united by a shared hunger for change. "We fought for these reforms because this city deserves accountability," she declared, her voice cutting through the murmur of the wind. "But some in the police department are working to undermine them, to protect their own power at the expense of the people they serve. We won't let that happen. We demand transparency, and we will not tolerate backroom deals that betray the will of this community." The words struck like a match, igniting a blaze of media coverage and public outrage. Articles dissected the department's tactics, activists flooded public meetings, and the pressure mounted, a relentless tide battering the union's defenses. Within the police force, cracks began to form. Officers who'd once shrugged at the reforms now shifted uncomfortably under the weight of scrutiny, their routines shadowed by the newly forming Oversight Committee. The union's grip weakened as whispers of dissent grew louder, and one day, Marcus rushed in with news that set Jane's heart racing. "We've got a breakthrough," he said, his voice alight with excitement. "An officer wants to talk about the resistance from the inside." The meeting with Officer Rodriguez took place in a dimly lit backroom of a quiet cafe, the air thick with the scent of coffee and tension. Rodriguez, a weary man with graying temples and a nervous tick in his jaw, sat across from Jane, his hands clasped tightly around a chipped mug. 15 years on the force," he began, his voice low and strained. "I've seen good people leave because they couldn't stomach the way things are run. The union's got too much sway, and yon who speaks out gets shut down, or worse." His eyes flicked to the door, then back to Jane, a flicker of fear warring with resolve. "I want change, but I'm scared. We all are." Jane leaned forward, her gaze steady and warm. "Thank you for coming forward," she said, her tone soft but firm. "We can protect you, but we need your help. If others join you, if we can show the public what's really happening, the union won't be able to hide." Rodriguez nodded slowly, a weight lifting from his shoulders as he committed to the fight. Over the next weeks, Jane and Marcus worked in secret, gathering testimonies from other officers, each one a thread in a growing web of truth. Anonymous quotes began appearing in the press, painting a vivid picture of a department torn between those clinging to power and those yearning for reform. As the Oversight Committee took shape, its presence a constant pressure on the force, Jane stood at the forefront, her determination unshaken. Every step forward was a lesson in justice, how it demanded vigilance, how it faltered when power went unchecked. The consequences of that abuse had scarred her city for too long, But now, with every voice raised, every ally gained, she saw a future taking root, one where dignity and fairness weren't just ideals, but realities forged through the courage of those who refused to be silenced. And as the city moved forward, Jane knew she'd carry this fight as long as it took, not just for herself, but for every soul who'd ever been crushed by a system desperate for change. The air in the city had grown heavy with the weight of old traditions, a stubborn grip on the past that refused to loosen. But as the winds of change began to stir, the people's voices rose like a swelling tide, crashing against the walls of resistance. It wasn't just anger that fueled them, it was a dawning realization, a flicker of clarity cutting through the fog. Not every police officer stood as a barricade against progress. Many within the force, their badges glinting under the dim streetlights, yearned for something better, a chance to mend the fractured trust between them and the community they'd sworn to serve. This shift in perception sent tremors through the police union, its once-iron influence beginning to rust under the pressure of a public no longer willing to stay silent. One humid evening, Jane and Marcus hunched over a cluttered desk in their cramped office, the faint hum of the city seeping through the cracked window. Papers littered the space between them, scribbled notes, legal drafts, and half-empty coffee cups staining the wood. Marcus leaned back in his chair, a slow, weary smile tugging at his lips. "I think we've done it, Jane," he said, his voice carrying a cautious optimism that hadn't been there before. "This doesn't feel like just another meeting or another protest. It feels bigger, like we've finally turned the corner." Jane's eyes lingered on the papers in front of her, her brow furrowed with the weight of every step they'd taken to get here. She nodded slowly, her expression a mix of resolve and quiet exhaustion. "It does," she admitted, her voice steady but tinged with something deeper, hope, perhaps, tempered by the scars of countless battles. "But we can't ease up now, Marcus. Not even for a moment. We have to keep pushing, keep fighting, until these reforms aren't just words on a page, but a living, breathing shift in how things work. Until the department's soul changes, not just its rules." Months rolled by, each one heavier than the last, yet brighter too. The Oversight Committee Jane had fought so hard to establish hummed to life, its members poring over reports and testimonies in a fluorescent-lit room that smelled faintly of ink and determination. Officers like Rodriguez, a weary man with sharp eyes and a quieter courage, stepped forward, their voices low but firm as they peeled back the layers of the department's inner workings. Rodriguez wasn't loud or brash. He carried himself with the careful gait of someone who'd seen too much, but still believed in something better. He'd spent years navigating the unspoken rules of the force, dodging the glares of union loyalists who saw his honesty as betrayal. Now, he sat at the committee table, his hands clasped tightly, offering insights that felt like keys to a locked door. Bit by bit, the reforms took root, tentative at first, like new shoots breaking through concrete, then stronger, more defiant. The union's grip weakened, its leaders retreating into hushed meetings, their once confident threats reduced to whispers. More officers emerged from the shadows, their faces etched with a mix of fear and resolve, eager to reshape a department they'd long wanted to believe in again. The road stretched on, winding and treacherous, littered with obstacles that loomed like storm clouds. Yet Jane Fonda stood at its helm, a figure both unyielding and human, her hands calloused from the fight. She'd done what many had whispered was impossible, pushed sweeping reforms through a system calcified by decades of inertia and begun to chip away at the culture that had festered within the city's police force. It wasn't finished, not by a long shot, but as she stood on her office balcony one crisp evening, the city sprawling below her in a tapestry of flickering lights, Jane felt something stir deep within her chest, raw, fragile, but real. The struggle had carved lines into her face, drained the color from her sleepless nights, but it had been worth it. Every ache, every tear, every shouted demand for accountability had built a path forward, a fragile bridge toward a future where justice wasn't just a dream. In the months that followed, the city began to transform under Jane's steady hand. The Oversight Committee didn't just exist, it thrived, its members conducting meticulous reviews of police conduct with a rigor that left no corner unexamined. Complaints that once vanished into bureaucratic black holes now saw the light, their numbers dwindling as accountability took hold. Rodriguez and others like him, officers who'd once flinched at the thought of speaking out, found their voices. Rodriguez's hands trembled the first time he testified, his words halting as he recounted years of ignored misconduct. But with each meeting, his shoulders straightened, his gaze grew steadier. He wasn't alone anymore. A new culture was emerging, one where breaking the law didn't mean a slap on the wrist, but real consequence, court dates, lost badges, and the weight of legal responsibility. The community felt it too, for the first time in years. Residents didn't just whisper their frustrations in shadowed doorways, they spoke them aloud, their voices carrying to Jane's open meetings. She sat at the head of a long table, her notepad filled with their concerns, her eyes meeting theirs with a quiet promise to listen. Trust, that brittle thread snapped by years of betrayal, began to mend, not perfectly, not quickly, but enough to feel like progress. Yet the opposition didn't vanish. It lingered like a storm on the horizon, gathering strength in boardrooms and backroom deals. One gray afternoon, as Jane sifted through the committee's latest report, Marcus burst into her office, his face tight with urgency. He dropped a thick stack of documents onto her desk, the thud echoing in the quiet room. "They're suing us," he said, his voice clipped. "The union. They've got a top-tier law firm claiming the reforms violate their contracts. Say it's putting officers in danger." Jane's heart sank as she flipped through the pages, the legal jargon blurring into a single, glaring truth. This was their latest weapon, a desperate swing to claw back power. She leaned back, rubbing her temples, the weight of it pressing down on her. "They've lost the public," she said, her tone sharp with defiance. "So now they're running to the courts. But we can't let this stop us, Marcus." He nodded, his jaw tight. "We need a plan, a damn good one. If they win this, everything crumbles. Every step we've taken, gone." Jane's eyes hardened. "We won't just defend ourselves, we'll take it to the people. They need to know what's at stake. This isn't just about reform, it's about justice itself. If we lose, it's not just a setback. It's a betrayal of everything we've promised them." The weeks that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and relentless preparation. Jane and her team huddled in strategy sessions, their voices overlapping in a frantic symphony of ideas. They held press conferences under glaring lights, Jane's words cutting through the noise with a clarity that rallied the city. The public responded, their support swelling like a river breaking its banks. This wasn't politics anymore, it was a fight for the soul of their home, a demand that power answer to the people it served. When the trial began, the city turned into a battleground. Crowds gathered outside the courthouse, their signs aloft, "Justice for all. No more corruption," their chants a heartbeat pulsing through the streets. Inside, the air crackled with tension. The union's lawyers, sleek and polished, argued with cold precision. The reforms stripped officers of their rights, left them vulnerable. But Jane's team, led by Linda Brooks, a whip-smart attorney with a fire in her ice, fought back. Linda stood tall in the courtroom, her voice steady as she dismantled their claims. "These reforms don't weaken the police," she said, her words ringing out. "They strengthen the city. They protect every citizen's rights and demand that those with power live up to it." The trial stretched on, each day a grueling marathon broadcast to a rapt audience. Protesters outside grew louder, their presence a constant reminder of what hung in the balance. This wasn't just about one city, it was a beacon, a precedent that could ripple across the nation. Jane held herself steady through it all, her calm exterior masking the storm within. She felt the weight of every eye on her, every hope pinned to her resolve. This was the hardest fight she'd ever faced, a crucible that could forge a new future or reduce her work to ashes. One quiet afternoon, as the trial neared its end, she and Marcus sat in her office, the silence between them thick with unspoken fears. "We've come so far," Marcus said, his voice soft, almost reverent. "No matter what the court says. You've changed this place, Jane. You've made people believe again." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes, exhaustion pooling in their depths. "We have, Marcus. But if we lose, it's not just a pause, it's years undone. We can't let that happen." He nodded, his hand resting on hers for a moment, a silent vow to see it through. The final day arrived, the courtroom swollen with Badice reporters scribbling furiously, activists clutching each other's hands, citizens holding their breath. The closing arguments unfolded, sharp and searing, and then came the wait. Days dragged by, each one a slow ache in Jane's chest. She kept working, her desk a fortress of papers and plans, but the uncertainty gnawed at her. When the ruling came, she stood with Marcus and their team. The air in the courtroom so still it felt like glass. The judge's voice broke the silence, deliberate and final. The court finds in favor of the city. Relief crashed over Jane like a wave, her knees trembling as the words sank in. They'd won. The reforms would stand. The union's last stand had failed. Outside, the crowd erupted, a roar of joy and defiance shaking the courthouse steps. Jane stepped into the sunlight, Marcus at her side, their faces alight with a hard-earned victory. She raised a hand, her voice cutting through the noise. "We did it," she said, emotion cracking her words. "Justice won today, but this isn't my win, it's yours. You stood up, you fought, and because of you, we're closer to a city where dignity isn't a privilege, it's a right." The cheers swelled, a tidal wave of unity washing over her. That night, back in her office, Jane and Marcus sat together, the city's lights painting the walls in soft gold. "This feels like a turning point," Marcus said, his voice warm with pride. "The reforms are sticking. We've beaten them in court." Jane nodded, her gaze distant but fierce. "It is, but we've seen what happens when power goes unchecked. We can't stop now." He grinned, leaning closer. "We won't. You've lit a fire, Jane. This city's awake now. This is just the start." She turned to the window, the skyline shimmering like a promise. He was right. The fight wasn't over, it never would be. But with the people behind her, with justice as their compass, Jane knew they could face anything. The lesson was clear. Power abused would always meet its reckoning, and together, they'd keep building a future worth believing in. Jane sank into her chair, the weight of the day settling into her bones as she stared out at the city skyline, its jagged edges softened by the fading light of dusk. She knew this momentous, fragile glimmer of hope was only the first step on a treacherous, winding path toward real change. The city was stirring, its people awakening to the deep-rooted flaws that had festered within the police department for far too long. A quiet hum of optimism pulsed through the streets, a sensation so foreign it almost felt fragile, like a flame flickering against a storm. The reforms she'd fought for were beginning to take hold, their roots sinking into the cracked soil of a broken system. For the first time in years, the community dared to dream of something better, a future where trust wasn't just a hollow promise. But Jane wasn't naive. She understood that true transformation was a slow, grueling beast, one that demanded vigilance and grit. The battle might have tipped in her favor for now, but the war was far from won. The police union had lost their latest legal skirmish, their arguments crumbling under the weight of evidence and public outcry. Yet, their defeat didn't mean surrender. Their influence lingered like a shadow cast across the precincts, a stubborn reminder of the old ways that had shielded corruption and excused brutality for generations. Jane could feel it in the air, thick and unyielding. The culture within those walls was a fortress of resistance, one that wouldn't crumble without a fight. She leaned back, her fingers tracing the edge of her desk, her thoughts drifting to the town halls she'd attended over the past months. The stories she'd heard there replayed in her mind like a haunting melody, tales of ordinary people, their voices trembling with anger and grief as they spoke of being dismissed, harassed, or worse, by the very officers sworn to protect them. There was the mother who'd clutched a photo of her son, lost to a senseless act of violence at the hands of a uniformed man who faced no consequences. There was the shopkeeper, his livelihood shattered after a false accusation spiraled into a nightmare of legal fees and threats. These weren't just anecdotes to Jane, they were the beating heart of her mission, the fuel that kept her pushing forward when exhaustion threatened to pull her under. The reforms were a triumph for those voices, a small but defiant step toward justice. But she knew better than to rest on that victory. If those cries were to mean anything, she had to ensure they weren't drowned out by apathy or time. The city's police oversight committee was finally up and running, a machine she'd helped build from the ground up. Its members, some earnest, some skeptical, sat around a long table in a sterile room, poring over policies and incident reports. Jane had seen enough of bureaucracy's underbelly to know how easily it could rot from within. Power had a way of twisting even the best intentions, and she wasn't about to let this committee become another toothless relic, bogged down by red tape or swayed by backroom deals. She made it her mission to stay tethered to its work, her presence a constant reminder that the stakes were too high for complacency. Every week, she carved out hours to sit with them, her sharp eyes scanning their progress, her questions cutting through vague assurances. She demanded transparency like it was oxygen, knowing that every officer who betrayed the public's trust needed to face real consequences, not just a slap on the wrist or a quiet transfer. Justice wasn't negotiable, and she'd be damned if she let it slip through the cracks. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting her office in strokes of amber and gold, Marcus stepped through the doorway. His broad shoulders were slightly hunched, a sign of the long hours they'd both been pouring into this fight. In his hands, he carried a thick stack of reports, the paper edges worn from being shuffled and studied. He set them down on her desk with a soft thud, his voice carrying a cautious warmth as he spoke. "We're making headway, Jane. People are starting to see the difference. Complaints about misconduct aren't just piling up in some forgotten drawer anymore. They're being investigated, taken seriously. A few officers have already been disciplined, and it's only the beginning." His words hung in the air, a tentative thread of good news woven into the fabric of their struggle. Jane's gaze flicked to the reports, her fingers brushing over the top page as she skimmed the numbers and names. A faint nod was her only reply at first, her mind already racing beyond the ink on the paper. "It's a start," she said finally, her tone steady but laced with an undercurrent of urgency. "But we can't let this be the finish line. Discipline's just the surface scratching it won't fix what's rotting underneath. We've got to dig deeper, change the way these officers think, the way they see the people they serve. Training, trust, that's where the real fight is." Marcus leaned against the edge of her desk, his dark eyes meeting hers with a quiet understanding. He was a man of few words, but when he spoke, it carried weight. "You're right. It's a hell of a mountain to climb. But the fact that folks out there are finding their courage speaking up when they've been wronged, that's no small thing. The community's waking up, Jane. They're watching every move we make, and that pressure's keeping the heat on." A ghost of a smile tugged at Jane's lips, a rare crack in her armor. "Good," she murmured, her voice firming with resolve. "That's exactly what we need. As long as they're paying attention, we've got leverage. We can keep this rolling." She turned her head, her gaze drifting to the window where the city sprawled out before her, its lights flickering to life against the gathering dusk. The road ahead stretched out in her mind's eye long, twisting, littered with obstacles she couldn't yet see. But she was ready. She'd always been ready. Marcus lingered for a moment, flipping through the reports as if to double-check his own optimism. He wasn't just her deputy, he was her anchor, a steady presence who'd stood by her through every bruising battle. His own story wasn't so different from the ones they'd heard at the town halls raised. In a neighborhood where sirens were a lullaby, where trust in authority was a luxury few could afford, that shared history bound them, a silent pact to see this through. As he straightened up to leave, he paused at the door, glancing back with a nod that said more than words ever could. Jane returned it, a quiet acknowledgement of the unspoken promise between them. Alone again, she let her thoughts wander back to the bigger picture. This wasn't just about her city, her fight. It was a mirror held up to a truth too many ignored. Power, when wielded without accountability, left scars that didn't fade. The police union's defiance, the officers who'd turned their badges into weapons, they were symptoms of a sickness that ran deep, a bias so entrenched it had nearly toppled even her, the mayor, when she dared to challenge it. Justice wasn't a gift handed down. It was a garden cultivated through sweat and sacrifice, its blooms fragile but fierce. The consequences of letting it wither were unthinkable: more mothers grieving, more lives discarded, more trust eroded until nothing remained but resentment. Jane's resolve hardened like steel in her chest. She'd keep tending that garden, no matter how long it took, no matter how many stood in her way. The city was inching toward something better, and she'd drag it there herself if she had to. Progress wasn't a dream, it was a demand, and she'd make sure it was met.